I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this, but here I am, caught in the middle of a family drama that seems to be spiraling out of control with each passing day. My name is Sarah, and I'm the new addition to the Turner family, having married Ethan just 6 months ago. We were so in love, so full of hope for our future together, but I never could have imagined the challenges that awaited us in this small, sleepy town nestled in the heart of rural America. From the moment I first met Michael Turner, Ethan's father, I could sense his disapproval. It was there in his steely gaze, in the way his jaw clenched ever so slightly when Ethan introduced me as his fiancée. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that it was just nerves, that he'd warm up to me once he got to know me better. But as the weeks turned into months, that initial tension only seemed to grow, festering like an open wound that refused to heal. I come from a different world than the Turners. I grew up in the city, surrounded by diversity and progressive ideas. My parents raised me to question authority, to think for myself, and to stand up for what I believe in. But here, in this small town where everyone knows everyone else's business, where tradition reigns supreme and change is viewed with suspicion, I feel like a fish out of water. Michael Turner is the epitome of everything this town represents. He's ex-military, proud of his service and the rigid discipline it instilled in him. He's conservative to his core, clinging to old-fashioned values and a worldview that seems outdated to me. I've tried to find common ground with him, to show him that despite our differences, we both want what's best for Ethan. But every attempt at connection is met with cold indifference at best, and thinly veiled hostility at worst. The Turner house, where we've been living since the wedding, is a reflection of Michael himself. It's solid, unyielding, a fortress of tradition standing alone amidst acres of dense forest. On the surface, it's picturesque, the kind of place you'd see on a postcard, with its wraparound porch and neatly tended garden. But for me, it's become a prison, a place where I feel constantly watched and judged. At first, Michael's disapproval was subtle. A raised eyebrow here, a dismissive comment there. But as time has worn on, his behavior has become more overt. He questions every decision I make, from the way I dress to the food I cook. He makes snide remarks about my city ways and how they don't belong here. Each interaction leaves me feeling small, insignificant, as if my very presence is an affront to everything he holds dear. Diane, Ethan's mother, tries her best to keep the peace. She's a kind woman, soft-spoken and gentle, but years of living with Michael have taught her to pick her battles carefully. I can see the pain in her eyes when Michael and I clash, the way she silently pleads with both of us to let things go. But how can I let go when I feel like my very identity is under attack? Ethan, my sweet, loving husband, is caught in an impossible position. He loves his father, respects him deeply, and I know it tears him apart to see us at odds. He tries to mediate, to find compromises, but his efforts often fall flat. When he stands up for me, Michael accuses him of choosing his wife over his family. When he sides with his father, I feel betrayed and alone. It's a no-win situation, and I can see the toll it's taking on him. As the days turn into weeks, and the weeks into months, I find myself becoming increasingly paranoid. I start to see hidden meanings in every glance, every gesture. When Michael insists on checking the locks before bed, is it just his military training? Or is he implying that I can't be trusted to secure the house? When he comments on the amount of food we're consuming, is it genuine concern for our budget, or a dig at my cooking skills? The isolation doesn't help. The Turner house is set far back from the main road, surrounded by thick woods that seem to close in on us with each passing day. In the city, I was used to the constant hum of traffic, the comforting presence of neighbors just a wall away. Here, the silence is oppressive, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the occasional cry of a distant bird. At night, when the darkness settles in like a heavy blanket, I find myself lying awake, every creak and groan of the old house setting my nerves on edge. I've tried to make the best of the situation. I've joined local community groups, volunteered at the library, anything to get out of the house and meet new people. But in a town this small, everyone knows I'm Michael Turner's daughter-in-law, and I can feel their eyes on me, judging, wondering if I'm as much trouble as Michael surely tells them I am. There are moments when I consider leaving, packing my bags and heading back to the city where I feel I belong. But then I look at Ethan, see the love in his eyes, and I know I can't give up. This is my family now, for better or worse, and I have to find a way to make it work. As the tension in the house continues to build, I find myself wondering how long we can go on like this. Something has to give, but I'm terrified of what that breaking point might look like. Will it be a screaming match that finally brings everything out into the open? Or will it be something more sinister? A quiet act of sabotage that pushes one of us over the edge. I try to remind myself that change takes time, that even the most deeply held beliefs can evolve if given the chance. I hold on to hope that one day, Michael will see me for who I truly am. Not a threat to his way of life, but a new perspective that could enrich his world if he'd only let it. But as each day passes with no sign of improvement, that hope grows dimmer. The worst part is the effect this is having on my relationship with Ethan. We used to talk about everything, sharing our dreams and fears without hesitation. Now, there's a growing silence between us, filled with all the things we're afraid to say out loud. I can see the strain in his eyes, the way he hesitates before speaking, carefully weighing each word. I miss the easy laughter we used to share, the spontaneous moments of joy that seemed to come so naturally before. Sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if Michael is right. Maybe I don't belong here. Maybe I'm too different, too set in my own ways to ever truly fit into this world he's created. But then I think of all the reasons I fell in love with Ethan, all the plans we made together, and I know I can't give up without a fight. As I sit here, watching the sun set over the trees, casting long shadows across the yard, I find myself at a crossroads. Do I continue to try and bridge this seemingly insurmountable gap between Michael and myself? Or do I accept that some differences are too great to overcome, and focus instead on building a life with Ethan away from the suffocating influence of his father? I don't have the answers yet, but I know that something has to change. This tension, this constant state of unease, it's not sustainable. For now, I'll continue to take it one day at a time, holding on to the love that brought me here and the hope that somehow, someway, we'll find a path forward. Because in the end, that's what family is supposed to be about: love, acceptance, and the willingness to grow together, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. As the night settles in and the house grows quiet, I take a deep breath and steel myself for whatever tomorrow may bring. In this moment of calm before the storm, I make a silent promise to myself. I will not be broken by this. I will find a way to thrive, to carve out my own place in this family and this town, no matter how long it takes or how hard I have to fight. Because I am Sarah Turner now, and I refuse to let anyone, not even Michael, make me feel like I don't belong. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation where I'd be afraid of my own family, but here I am, living in a constant state of anxiety and dread. It's been over a year since I married Ethan and moved into the Turner household, and what started as subtle tension has now escalated into full-blown hostility. The once peaceful countryside that surrounds our home now feels like a prison, isolating me from the outside world and trapping me in this nightmare. Every day brings a new challenge, a new confrontation with Michael, my father-in-law. His disapproval of me has morphed into something far more sinister. It's no longer just about our differences in values or lifestyle. He seems determined to prove that I'm somehow a threat to his family, to his way of life. The comments he makes are no longer veiled or subtle. They're direct, cutting, and often made right in front of Ethan. Just yesterday, as we sat around the dinner table, Michael looked straight at Ethan and said, "Son, can't you see what she's doing? She's trying to drive a wedge between you and your family. Before you know it, you'll be just like her, forgetting where you came from, who you really are." The words hung in the air like a poisonous cloud, and I felt my heart racing, waiting for Ethan to defend me, to say something, anything. But he just sat there, eyes down, pushing food around his plate. I couldn't take it anymore. Months of pent-up frustration and hurt came pouring out as I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "That's enough, Michael," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "I've tried to be respectful, to find common ground, but I won't sit here and let you talk about me like this. I love Ethan and I love his family, but that doesn't mean I have to change who I am or what I believe in. I deserve respect, and I'm demanding it now." The silence that followed was deafening. Diane, my mother-in-law, looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Ethan's eyes were wide with shock. He'd never seen me confront his father like this before. And Michael? For a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Was it surprise? Respect? But it quickly hardened into something cold and determined. He didn't say another word, just got up and left the table. That confrontation marked a turning point. The uneasy peace we'd been maintaining shattered, replaced by an open hostility that permeates every interaction. Michael no longer tries to hide his disdain for me. He questions everything I do, from the way I keep house to the friends I make in town. He makes snide comments about my liberal ideas corrupting Ethan, about how I'm not fit to be a proper wife or mother. What hurts the most is Ethan's reaction to all of this. I love him deeply, but his inability to stand up to his father is creating a rift between us that grows wider every day. When I try to talk to him about it, he brushes off my concerns. "It's just Dad being Dad," he'll say, or he'll come around eventually. "You just need to give it time." But how much time am I supposed to give? How long am I supposed to endure this treatment? I've started to notice other changes, too. Michael seems to always be around, even when he shouldn't be. I'll be on the phone with a friend, and he'll suddenly appear in the doorway, claiming he was just passing by. I'll go for a walk in the woods behind the house, and I'll catch glimpses of him through the trees, watching me. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid, but now I'm not so sure. The other day, I came home from grocery shopping to find my dresser drawers slightly out of place, as if someone had been rifling through them. When I mentioned it to Ethan, he suggested that maybe his mom had been putting away laundry. But Diane never touches my things without asking first. The pit in my stomach grew deeper. I've started keeping a journal, hidden away where I hope Michael won't find it. I document everything. Every snide comment, every suspicious glance, every time I feel like I'm being watched. Part of me feels silly for doing it, like I'm overreacting. But another part, a part that's growing stronger every day, tells me that I need to protect myself, to have a record of what's happening in case of what? I'm not sure I want to finish that thought. The worst part is the toll this is taking on my relationship with Ethan. The man I married, the one who used to look at me with such love and admiration, now seems distant and conflicted. We used to talk for hours about our dreams, our fears, our hopes for the future. Now our conversations are stilted and superficial, both of us afraid to broach the subject that's tearing us apart. Last night, I finally broke down and told Ethan everything. My fears about his father's behavior, the feeling of being constantly watched, the strain it's all putting on our marriage. I poured my heart out, hoping that he'd finally see how serious the situation had become. But his response left me cold. "Sarah," he said, his voice tinged with exasperation, "you're blowing this way out of proportion. Dad's just protective of the family. He'll come around once he sees how happy we are together. But are we happy together? The question haunts me as I lie awake at night, listening to the creaks and groans of the old house, wondering if it's just the settling of wood or if it's Michael, prowling the halls, looking for evidence of some imagined betrayal. I find myself at a crossroads, unsure of which way to turn. Do I stay and fight for my marriage, for the life I thought I was building with Ethan? Or do I leave, return to the city where I at least felt safe and understood? The thought of leaving Ethan breaks my heart, but the thought of staying in this hostile environment, always looking over my shoulder, always waiting for the next confrontation, is becoming unbearable. There are moments when I catch a glimpse of the man I fell in love with, when Ethan smiles at me across the room, or when we share a quiet moment together away from his father's watchful eyes. In those moments, I remember why I'm here, why I'm fighting so hard to make this work. But those moments are becoming fewer and farther between, overshadowed by the constant tension and fear that now defines our lives. As I sit here, writing these words, I can hear Michael's heavy footsteps in the hallway outside our bedroom. They pause for a moment outside our door, and I hold my breath, wondering if this will be the night he finally confronts me directly, accuses me of whatever imagined crimes he's concocted in his mind. But the footsteps move on, and I exhale slowly, realizing that I've been gripping my pen so tightly that my knuckles have turned white. Tomorrow, I've decided I'm going to have one last conversation with Ethan. I'm going to lay it all out, my fears, my suspicions, and my ultimatum. Either we move out of this house, away from his father's toxic influence, or I leave on my own. It's not the future I imagined for us, but I can't keep living like this, always on edge, always afraid. As I close my journal and hide it away in its secret spot, I find myself hoping against hope that Ethan will choose me, that he'll see how much damage his father's behavior is causing and take a stand. But a small voice in the back of my mind whispers that it might already be too late, that the rift between us has grown too wide to bridge. Whatever happens tomorrow, I know that my life will never be the same. The naive, hopeful woman who moved to this small town, ready to embrace a new family and a new life, is gone. In her place is someone stronger, someone who's learned the hard way that love isn't always enough, that sometimes you have to fight for your own happiness and safety. As I drift off to sleep, my mind races with possibilities, both hopeful and terrifying. Tomorrow will be a new day, a turning point one way or another. And whatever happens, I'll face it head on. No longer the passive victim of Michael's hostility, but a woman ready to take control of her own destiny. I never thought it would come to this. The tension that had been building for months, the sideways glances, the hushed arguments, it all exploded in a single, terrifying moment that I'll never forget. It was a Tuesday afternoon, unseasonably warm for October. I remember because I had the windows open, letting in the crisp autumn air, trying to shake off the suffocating feeling that had become all too familiar in this house. I was in the kitchen, mindlessly organizing the pantry, anything to keep my hands busy and my mind off the constant stress. Ethan was at work, and I was looking forward to a few hours of peace before he came home. That's when I heard the front door slam. My heart jumped into my throat. I knew that sound, that forceful closure that signaled Michael's arrival. But Ethan wasn't due home for hours, and Michael never came over when his son wasn't here. I stepped out of the kitchen, my hands trembling slightly as I wiped them on a dish towel. "Michael!" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is everything okay?" That's when I saw him, standing in the hallway, his face contorted with a rage I'd never seen before. In his hand, he clutched a stack of papers, waving them at me like a weapon. "I knew it," he spat, advancing towards me. "I knew you were no good for this family. And now I have proof." My mind raced, trying to understand what he was talking about. Proof? Proof of what? As he got closer, I could see the papers more clearly. They were printouts of emails, some highlighted passages jumping out at me. With a sickening jolt, I realized what they were. Emails between me and an old college friend, Jack. We'd been catching up, reminiscing about old times, nothing more. But taken out of context, I could see how some of our exchanges might seem inappropriate. "Where did you get those?" I demanded, my shock turning quickly to anger. "You had no right to go through my personal emails." Michael's laugh was cold, mirthless. "I had every right," he snarled. "I'm protecting my son from a cheating, lying." He called me a name I won't repeat, each syllable dripping with venom. "I'm going to show these to Ethan. He'll finally see you for what you really are." I felt like I was in a nightmare, everything moving in slow motion. "Michael, you've got it all wrong," I pleaded, trying to make him understand. "Jack is just a friend. There's nothing going on between us. Please let me explain." But he wasn't listening. His eyes had that glazed look I'd seen before, the one that meant he'd made up his mind and nothing I could say would change it. "You've torn this family apart," he growled, taking another step towards me. I backed up, feeling the wall behind me. "You've poisoned my son against me, against everything we stand for. And now this." He waved the papers again, his hand shaking with fury. I don't know what came over me in that moment. Maybe it was months of pent-up frustration, of feeling cornered and misunderstood. Maybe it was the primal fear of being trapped with no way out. Whatever it was, I snapped. "You're the one tearing this family apart," I shouted, surprising even myself with the force of my words. "You're obsessed. You've been watching me, following me, going through my things. You're sick, Michael. You need help." I saw something change in his eyes then. A flash of what? Hurt. Shame. But it was quickly replaced by a rage, so intense it made me shrink back against the wall. "How dare you?" he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "After everything I've done for this family, everything I've sacrificed. You ungrateful little..." He lunged at me then, his hands reaching for my throat. I reacted on instinct, ducking under his arm and scrambling towards the living room. But he was faster than I expected. His hand caught my arm, yanking me back with such force that I lost my balance, crashing into the side table. The lamp toppled over, shattering on the hardwood floor. "Michael, stop!" I screamed, genuine fear coursing through me now. But he was beyond reason. His face was red, contorted, almost unrecognizable. This wasn't the stern, disapproving father-in-law I'd known. This was someone else entirely, someone dangerous. I managed to break free from his grip, but he came at me again, backing me into a corner. I looked around desperately for something. Anything I could use to defend myself. My hand closed around a heavy bookend on the shelf beside me. I didn't want to hurt him, but I was terrified of what he might do. "Stay back," I warned, holding the bookend in front of me like a shield. "I mean it, Michael. Don't come any closer." But he kept coming, his eyes wild, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "You've ruined everything," he snarled. "I'm going to make sure you never hurt my family again." What happened next is a blur. He lunged at me again, and I swung the bookend, more out of reflex than any conscious decision. I felt it connect with a sickening thud, and Michael stumbled backwards, a look of shock replacing the rage on his face. For a moment, we both stood there, frozen in disbelief at what had just happened. Then, like a dam breaking, everything erupted into chaos. Michael recovered quickly, his shock turning back to fury. He charged at me again, this time managing to grab me by the shoulders, slamming me against the wall. My head cracked against the plaster, and for a moment, my vision swam. I could feel his hands on my throat, squeezing, cutting off my air. I fought back with everything I had, kicking, scratching, trying desperately to break his grip. The bookend had fallen from my hand, but I managed to grab a picture frame from the shelf beside us. Without thinking, I smashed it against the side of Michael's head. Glass shattered, raining down on both of us, but his grip loosened just enough for me to slip away. We grappled across the room, knocking over furniture, gasping and grunting with effort. I was running on pure adrenaline now, my mind focused on one thing only: survival. I managed to land a solid kick to Michael's knee, and he went down with a roar of pain. But as he fell, he grabbed my ankle, pulling me down with him. We rolled on the floor, each trying to gain the upper hand. I could taste blood in my mouth, feel the sting of cuts from the broken glass. Michael was stronger than me, but I was fighting for my life, and that gave me a desperate kind of strength. Suddenly, over the sound of our struggle, I heard the front door open. "Sarah, Dad!" Ethan's voice, filled with confusion and alarm, cut through the chaos. For a split second, Michael and I both froze, our eyes locking. I saw a flicker of something: regret, fear, pass over his face. Then Ethan was there in the doorway of the living room, taking in the scene before him with horror. "What the hell is going on?" he shouted, rushing towards us. But it was too late. The momentum of our struggle, the angle at which we'd frozen, it all came together in one terrible moment. As Ethan reached for us, Michael lost his balance. I saw his eyes widen in surprise as he fell backwards. There was a sickening crack as his head struck the corner of the coffee table, and then silence. The three of us remained motionless for what felt like an eternity. Me, sprawled on the floor, bleeding and gasping for breath. Ethan, his hand outstretched, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. And Michael lay still, so terribly still, a small pool of blood forming beneath his head. "Dad!" Ethan's voice was small, childlike. He knelt beside his father, gently shaking him. "Dad, can you hear me?" But there was no response. With trembling hands, Ethan felt for a pulse, his eyes growing wide with panic when he couldn't find one. I watched, numb with shock, as Ethan fumbled for his phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. As he spoke to the dispatcher, his voice cracking with emotion, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. This wasn't just a fight that had gotten out of hand. This was, oh God, what was this? I looked around the room, taking in the destruction. Broken furniture, shattered glass, blood, mine and Michael's, staining the carpet. How had we gotten here? How had a family disagreement turned into this? As the sound of sirens grew in the distance, I caught Ethan's eye. The look he gave me, a mixture of confusion, horror, and something else I couldn't quite name, broke my heart. In that moment, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Whatever happened next, whether Michael survived or not, our lives had been irrevocably changed. The paramedics arrived in a flurry of activity, pushing past us to attend to Michael. The police weren't far behind, their questions sharp and probing. I answered as best I could, my mind still reeling from what had transpired. I could see the doubt in their eyes as I tried to explain, tried to make them understand that it had been self-defense, that I never meant for any of this to happen. As they led me out of the house, handcuffs cold against my wrists, I caught one last glimpse of Ethan. He stood in the doorway, watching me go, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. I wanted to call out to him, to explain, to beg him to understand. But the words caught in my throat. What could I possibly say to make this right? The police car door closed behind me, and as we pulled away from the house that had never felt like home, I was left with nothing but the weight of my actions and the uncertain future that lay ahead. How had love turned to this? And where do we go from here? I never thought it would end like this. The world around me is fading, growing dimmer with each labored breath I take. I can taste copper in my mouth, feel the warmth of my own blood seeping through my clothes. How did we get here? How did a family disagreement spiral so far out of control? It all happened so fast. One moment, Michael and I were arguing, our voices rising, years of tension finally boiling over. The next, God, I can still see the look in his eyes. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something else, something primal and terrifying. When he grabbed that fireplace poker, I knew this wasn't going to end well. I tried to run, to get away, but he was too quick. The first blow caught me in the back, sending me sprawling across the floor. I remember thinking, absurdly, about how I just cleaned that hardwood yesterday. The pain was immediate, intense, unlike anything I'd ever felt before. But it was nothing compared to what came next. I rolled over, trying to crawl away, to reason with him, to do anything to stop what was happening. Michael, please, I gasped. Think about what you're doing. Think about Ethan. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a hint of the man I'd once known. But then it was gone, replaced by that terrible blank rage. The poker came down again and again. I tried to shield myself, to fight back, but it was useless. Each impact sent shockwaves of agony through my body. I could hear myself screaming, but it sounded distant, like it was coming from someone else. Through the haze of pain, I became aware of another sound. The front door opening, footsteps rushing in. Ethan's voice, filled with confusion and alarm. Dad! Sarah, what's going on? The assault stopped abruptly. I managed to turn my head, to see Ethan standing in the doorway, his eyes wide with horror as he took in the scene before him. His father, standing over me with the bloody fireplace poker still raised. Me broken and bleeding on the floor. Dad! Ethan's voice was small, disbelieving. What have you done? Michael stumbled back, the poker clattering to the floor. He looked from me to Ethan, then back to me, as if seeing us for the first time. It was an accident, he stammered. She attacked me. I was just defending myself. But Ethan wasn't listening. He rushed to my side, cradling my head in his lap. Sarah, can you hear me? Oh God, there's so much blood. We need an ambulance. Now! I wanted to tell Ethan that I loved him, that I was sorry for all the trouble I'd caused. But I couldn't find the words. The pain was fading now, replaced by a strange, floating sensation. I could hear Ethan on the phone, his voice frantic as he called for help. Michael was pacing, muttering to himself, still insisting it was all a misunderstanding. As my vision began to blur, I found myself thinking about all the moments that had led us here. The first time I met Ethan, how his smile had lit up the room. The day we told his parents we were getting married, the tightness around Michael's eyes even as he congratulated us. All the little arguments, the snide comments, the growing tension that we'd all ignored, hoping it would just go away on its own. I wish I could go back, change things somehow. Maybe if I tried harder to understand Michael, to find common ground. Maybe if Ethan and I had moved away when things first started getting bad. Maybe. The room is getting darker now. I can barely feel Ethan's hands on my face, hear his voice begging me to hold on, to stay with him. I want to. God, how I want to. But I can feel myself slipping away. In the distance, I hear sirens. Too late, I think. It's all too late. The last thing I see before the darkness takes me is Ethan's face, streaked with tears, mouthing words I can no longer hear. And behind him, Michael, slumped against the wall, the full weight of what he's done finally sinking in. "I'm sorry," I try to say. "I'm so sorry it came to this." And then nothing. The next thing I'm aware of is light. Bright, harsh light and the steady beep of machines. For a moment, I think I must be dead, but the pain, dull and distant but undeniably there, tells me otherwise. I'm in a hospital bed, I realize. Tubes and wires connect me to various machines. My entire body feels heavy, like it's made of lead. But I'm alive. Somehow, against all odds, I'm alive. Ethan is there, slumped in a chair beside my bed. He looks terrible, unshaven. Dark circles under his eyes. His clothes rumpled like he's been wearing them for days. When he sees my eyes open, he leaps to his feet, grabbing my hand. "Sarah? Oh my God, Sarah, you're awake. Can you hear me? Do you know where you are?" I try to speak, but my throat is dry, my voice a weak rasp. Ethan quickly brings a cup of water to my lips, helping me take small sips. When I can finally form words, I ask the question that's burning in my mind. "What happened?" "Your father." Ethan's face darkens. "He's in custody," he says, his voice tight with emotion. "They arrested him at the scene. He's being charged with attempted murder." The words hit me like a physical blow. Attempted murder. It seems so surreal, so impossible. And yet, the pain in my body, the machines keeping me alive, they're all too real. "How long have I been here?" I asked. 5 days, Ethan replies. "You were in critical condition when they brought you in. The doctors, they weren't sure you were going to make it." 5 days. I've lost 5 days of my life. And in those 5 days, everything has changed. The family I married into, the life I thought I was building, it's all gone, shattered like glass. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," Ethan says, his voice breaking. "I should have seen what was happening. I should have done something sooner. If I had just stood up to him, if I had taken your concerns seriously." I squeeze his hand weakly. "It's not your fault," I tell him. "And I mean it. We were all caught in this terrible dance. All of us too afraid or too stubborn to break the pattern until it was too late." Over the next few days, as I drift in and out of consciousness, I learn more about what happened after I blacked out. How the paramedics had worked frantically to stabilize me. How Michael had been led away in handcuffs, still insisting it was all a misunderstanding. How Ethan had ridden in the ambulance with me, holding my hand and begging me not to leave him. Diane comes to visit, her face pale and drawn. She hugs me gently, mindful of my injuries, and apologizes over and over. "I knew he was getting worse," she says. "I should have done something. I should have gotten him help." I want to comfort her, to tell her it's not her fault either. But the truth is, a part of me is angry. Angry at her for enabling Michael's behavior for so long. Angry at Ethan for not standing up to his father sooner. Angry at myself for not leaving when I had the chance. But mostly I'm just tired. Tired of the pain, both physical and emotional. Tired of the constant stream of police officers and lawyers, asking me to recount every terrible detail of that day. Tired of seeing the guilt and grief in Ethan's eyes every time he looks at me. As the days pass and my strength slowly returns, I find myself facing an uncertain future. The doctors say I'll recover eventually, but there will likely be lasting effects from my injuries. The legal process is just beginning. And I know there will be a trial, where I'll have to face Michael again, to relive that terrible day in front of a courtroom full of strangers. And then there's my marriage. Ethan swears he'll stand by me, that we'll get through this together. But I can see the toll it's taking on him, being torn between his love for me and his love for his father. Can our relationship survive this? Do I even want it to? One night, as Ethan sleeps in the chair beside my bed, I find myself staring out the window at the city lights. I think about the girl I was when I first came to this town, full of hope and love and dreams for the future. I barely recognize her now, but as I watch the sun begin to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I feel something stirring inside me. A tiny spark of, not hope, exactly, but determination. I survived. Despite everything, I'm still here. And maybe, just maybe, I can find a way to build something new from the ashes of what was lost. It won't be easy. The road ahead is long and uncertain. But as I feel Ethan's hand in mine, as I think about the friends and family who have rallied around me, I know I'm not alone. Whatever comes next, Whatever challenges lie ahead, I'll face them. Because I'm stronger than I ever knew, and I refuse to let this tragedy define the rest of my life. As the first rays of sunlight stream through the window, I close my eyes and make a silent promise to myself. To heal, to grow, to find a way forward. It's not the future I imagined, but it's mine. And I'm going to make the most of it, one day at a time. I never thought I'd be sitting here, in this cold courtroom, watching my father's life unravel before my eyes. It's been 6 months since that terrible day, 6 months since I lost Sarah, and yet it feels like both an eternity and a heartbeat. The pain is still raw, a constant ache in my chest that never seems to fade. As I listen to the prosecutor lay out the case against my father, I can't help but replay that day in my mind for the 1000th time. The shock of walking into our home, seeing Sarah on the floor, my father standing over her with that bloody fireplace poker, the sound of Sarah's labored breathing, the frantic ride to the hospital, the moment the doctors told me she was gone. It's all etched into my memory, a nightmare I can't wake up from. The courtroom is packed. It seems like the entire town has turned out to witness the downfall of Michael Turner, once respected veteran and pillar of the community. I can feel their eyes on me, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. They all want to know how this could have happened, how a family could have fallen apart so spectacularly. As the trial progresses, I learn things about my father that I never knew, or perhaps never wanted to see. Neighbors testify about his controlling behavior, how they'd heard arguments coming from our house late at night. Sarah's friends talk about how she confided in them, expressing fear about my father's growing obsession with her. Even my mother, her voice shaking, tells the court about years of walking on eggshells, of trying to keep the peace in a house ruled by my father's iron will. With each testimony, I feel a piece of my childhood crumble away. The strong, principled man I thought I knew is replaced by a stranger, someone capable of manipulation, of cruelty, of murder. I want to stand up, to shout that they're wrong, that this isn't the man who taught me to fish, who helped me with my homework, who beamed with pride at my college graduation. But I can't, because I know, deep down, that they're telling the truth. My father sits at the defense table, his shoulders slumped, looking older than I've ever seen him. He doesn't meet my eyes. He hasn't since that day. At first, he'd insisted it was all a terrible accident, that Sarah had attacked him and he'd only been defending himself. But as the evidence mounted, his story began to change. Now his lawyers are arguing for a reduced charge, claiming temporary insanity, saying the stress of family conflict had pushed him over the edge. I want to feel something for him. Pity, anger, anything. But I'm numb. All I can think about is Sarah. Sweet, vibrant Sarah, who brought so much light into my life, who tried so hard to fit into our family, even as my father pushed her away at every turn. I remember our wedding day, how radiant she looked, how full of hope we both were for our future together. Now that future is gone, shattered beyond repair. The hardest part of the trial is when they show the crime scene photos. I have to leave the courtroom, unable to bear the sight of our home. The home we'd made together, turned into a place of such violence. I sit in the hallway, head in my hands, as my mother's soft sobs echo from inside. As the trial draws to a close, I find myself dreading the verdict. Not because I fear my father will be found innocent, the evidence against him is overwhelming. No, I dread it because once the verdict is read, once the sentence is handed down, I'll have to figure out how to move forward. How to live in a world where my wife is gone, and my father is a convicted murderer. The day of the verdict, the courtroom is so quiet you could hear a pin drop. As the jury foreman stands, I hold my breath, though I already know what's coming. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant, Michael Turner, guilty. There's a collective gasp from the gallery, then a low murmur that grows in volume. I sit there, frozen, as the judge calls for order. My mother lets out a strangled sob beside me, and my father just sits there, staring straight ahead, as if he hasn't heard a word. As they lead him away in handcuffs, he finally turns to look at me. For a moment, I see a flicker of the man I once knew. Regret, sorrow, a plea for understanding in his eyes. But then it's gone, replaced by that blank stare that's become so familiar over the past months. I realize in that moment that I've lost them both, Sarah to death, and my father to something I can't even begin to comprehend. The days following the verdict are a blur, Reporters camp outside our house, hungry for a statement, for some insight into the tragedy that's captivated the town. I ignore them all, retreating into the silence of my empty home. I walk from room to room, touching Sarah's things, trying to hold on to the memory of her laugh, her smile, the way she'd dance around the kitchen while cooking dinner. My mother tries to reach out, to offer comfort, but I can't bear to be around her. Every time I look at her, I see the years she spent enabling my father's behavior, turning a blind eye to the tension that was building in our family. I know it's not fair to blame her, that she was as much a victim as anyone, but the anger and resentment are too strong to ignore. Friends and neighbors bring casseroles, offer condolences, ask if there's anything they can do to help. I thank them politely, but inside I'm screaming. How can they help? Can they bring Sarah back? Can they erase the image of her broken body from my mind? Can they give me back the father I thought I knew? Weeks pass, and slowly life in the town begins to return to normal. But for me, there is no normal anymore. I go through the motions, return to work, pay the bills, eat when I remember to. But it all feels hollow, meaningless. At night, I lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of my life, wondering if there was something I could have done differently, some way I could have prevented this tragedy. One day, I receive a letter from the prison. It's from my father. For a long time, I just stare at the envelope, unable to bring myself to open it. When I finally do, I find pages of apologies, explanations, pleas for forgiveness. He writes about how much he regrets what he did, how he never meant for things to go so far, how he wishes he could take it all back. But as I read his words, I feel nothing. No anger, no sadness, no forgiveness. Just emptiness. I realize then that I have a choice to make. I can let this tragedy define the rest of my life, can lose myself in grief and anger and regret, or I can try to find a way forward, to honor Sarah's memory by living the life she would have wanted for me. It won't be easy. The pain will never fully go away, and the weight of what happened will always be with me. But I owe it to Sarah and to myself to try. So I start small. I donate Sarah's clothes to a women's shelter, knowing she would have wanted them to go to someone in need. I start seeing a therapist, forcing myself to confront the tangled mess of emotions I've been avoiding. I reach out to Sarah's parents, who I've been too ashamed to face, and together we share memories of her, finding comfort in our shared love and loss. Slowly, painfully, I begin to rebuild my life. I know it will never be the same, that there will always be a Sarah-shaped hole in my heart. But as the days turn into weeks, and the weeks into months, I start to see glimmers of hope. Moments where the pain recedes just enough for me to remember the joy Sarah brought into my life, rather than just the tragedy of her loss. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive my father, or if I even want to. I don't know if I'll ever love again, ever trust again the way I did with Sarah. But I do know that I'm going to keep moving forward one day at a time, because that's what Sarah would have wanted, and because, despite everything, I'm still here. Still breathing, still fighting. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough for now. As I stand at Sarah's grave, placing fresh flowers against the cool marble of her headstone, I make a silent promise. To live, to love, to make a difference in the world. To make sure that her death, as senseless and tragic as it was, wasn't in vain. It's a heavy burden, but it's also a lifeline. A reason to keep going when the darkness threatens to overwhelm me. I trace the letters of her name, feeling a bittersweet mix of love and loss wash over me. I miss you, I whisper. I'll always miss you, but I'm going to be okay. We're going to be okay. And for the first time in a long time, I actually believe it. It's been 5 years since that fateful day, and sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, the echoes of Sarah's screams ringing in my ears. 5 years since I lost my wife, and in many ways my father too. 5 years of trying to rebuild a life from the shattered pieces of what once was. I left our small town not long after the trial ended. I couldn't bear to walk down those familiar streets, to see the pitying looks in the eyes of people I'd known my whole life. Every corner held a memory of Sarah, of my father, of the life I thought we'd have together. So I packed up what little I could bring myself to keep and moved to the city, hoping that the anonymity of urban life might offer some respite from the weight of my past. My father, Michael Turner, is serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. I haven't visited him. Not once in all these years. He writes sometimes, his letters filled with apologies and explanations that always fall short. I read them, because some part of me still needs to understand, still hopes for answers that I know will never come. But I don't write back. I can't. The gulf between us is too wide, too deep, filled with the blood of the woman I loved. I often think about what I could have done differently. If I had stood up to my father sooner. If I had taken Sarah's concerns more seriously. If I had been brave enough to confront the tension that had been building in our family for years. The what-ifs haunt me, a constant reminder of my own culpability in this tragedy. My therapist tells me that it's not healthy to dwell on these thoughts, that I can't change the past. But knowing that doesn't make it any easier to let go. The story of what happened to our family has become something of a local legend back home. I hear snippets of it sometimes, when I run into someone from the old town. They speak in hushed tones about the respected veteran who snapped, about the young couple torn apart by family strife. It's strange to hear your life reduced to gossip, to see the pain and loss that still feels so raw to me treated like some cautionary tale. I've tried to move on, to build a new life for myself. I threw myself into my work, climbing the corporate ladder with a single-minded determination that left little room for anything else. I've made new friends, even dated a few times. But every relationship ends the same way, with me pulling away, unable to open myself up to the possibility of that kind of loss again. My mother calls every Sunday, her voice always tinged with a mixture of hope and sadness. She's trying to rebuild her life too, grappling with her own guilt and grief. We talk about mundane things, the weather, her garden, my job. We never mention my father, or Sarah, or the life we used to have. It's easier that way, to pretend that we're just a normal family having a normal conversation. But the silences between our words speak volumes. Sometimes, in my weaker moments, I find myself looking at old photos. Sarah's smile, so bright and full of life, frozen in time. My father, his arm around my shoulders, pride shining in his eyes. We look so happy, so normal. How did we go from that to this? The contrast between those frozen moments of joy and the reality of our shattered lives is almost too much to bear. I've learned, over these past 5 years, that healing isn't linear. There are good days, where I can almost feel like myself again, where I can laugh with friends or lose myself in a project at work. And then there are the bad days, where the grief and anger and guilt threaten to overwhelm me, where I can barely bring myself to get out of bed. But I keep going, one day at a time, because I know that's what Sarah would have wanted. The hardest lesson in all of this has been understanding the power of unresolved conflict, of words left unsaid and feelings left unexpressed. My father's need for control, his inability to accept change or difference, my own reluctance to rock the boat. It all contributed to the perfect storm that ended in tragedy. I see now how small resentments can grow into insurmountable barriers, how pride and stubbornness can blind us to the damage we're doing to those we love most. I've made it my mission now to speak up, to address conflicts head-on rather than letting them fester. It's not easy. Years of conditioning don't disappear overnight, but I'm trying. In my job, in my friendships, in what remains of my family relationships, I push myself to have those difficult conversations, to be honest about my feelings and needs. It's scary and sometimes it's painful, but it's also freeing in a way I never expected. There are moments, rare but precious, where I can think about Sarah and feel something other than crushing grief. I remember her laugh, the way her eyes would crinkle at the corners when she smiled, the passion she brought to everything she did. In those moments, I'm grateful for the time we had together, short as it was. She taught me so much about love, about standing up for what you believe in, about embracing life with open arms. I try to honor her memory by living the way she would have wanted me to, with courage, with compassion, with an open heart. As for my father, that's more complicated. There are days when I'm consumed by anger, when I want nothing more than for him to suffer as he made Sarah suffer. But there are also days when I remember the good times, fishing trips and baseball games, the pride in his eyes when I graduated college. I'm not ready to forgive him, not sure if I'll ever be able to, but I'm trying to understand, to see how his own traumas and insecurities led him down this dark path. It doesn't excuse what he did. Nothing ever could, but it helps me make sense of it, if only a little. 5 years on, and I'm still learning how to live in this new reality. I'm not the same person I was before that terrible day, and I never will be again. The weight of what happened will always be with me, a shadow that I can never fully shake. But I'm learning to carry it, to use it as a reminder of the preciousness of life, of the importance of love and understanding. I don't know what the future holds. Some days, the thought of continuing on this path, of facing each day with the knowledge of what I've lost, seems impossible. But I keep going, because I have to believe that there's still good in this world, still beauty and love and hope. I keep going because I owe it to Sarah, to the life we dreamed of having together. I keep going because, despite everything, I'm still here. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. As I stand here, looking out over the city that has become my home, I feel a mix of emotions I can't quite name. Sadness, yes, and regret, those are constants now. But also a quiet determination, a resolve to make something meaningful out of the wreckage of my past. I can't change what happened, can't bring Sarah back or undo my father's actions. But I can choose how I move forward, how I honor the lessons learned from this tragedy. So I take a deep breath, square my shoulders, and face another day. Because that's all any of us can do, really. Face each day as it comes, with all its challenges and opportunities, its joys and sorrows, and hope that, in the end, we've made some small difference in the world, that we've loved and been loved, that we've learned from our mistakes and grown from our pain. That's Sarah's legacy, I think. And in carrying it forward, in striving to be the man she always believed I could be, I find a purpose. It's not the life I imagined, not the future we planned together, but it's mine, and I'm going to make it count.